All right, everyone, let's get to it. Welcome to Gaslit Nation's How to Make a Podcast Workshop. I've gotten a lot of questions over the years from Gaslit Nation listeners, especially on Patreon, about the ins and outs of producing a podcast. So I'm very excited to share this with you all. We have a brilliant community of listeners at Gaslit Nation. We have listeners that are producing music, who are making all sorts of art, who are running for office, who are getting out the vote. You guys move mountains. So why not throw producing a podcast into the mix? If you've ever wanted to know what goes into making a podcast, this is a bit of a summary of that to help you get started. And if you have any questions, of course, send them in a message or leave them in the comment section. To give you an idea of the exciting creativity we have going on here at Gaslit Nation, I get messages that listeners are now collaborating with each other to work on music projects. I read a screenplay that was by a Gaslit Nation listener after doing our screenplay writing workshop. So there's a lot of creativity, and that is crucial because that is how we keep our minds free and open and stay grounded and live above the noise that they're intentionally producing to try to demoralize us. See podcasting as another expression of your creativity, your art. And another important reason to consider a podcast is because, as we know, we are in this crisis of corruption because of the decline of news in recent decades. You have Sinclair creating Fox News local stations, spreading disinformation, rotting people's brains. You have hedge funds gobbling up what's left of newsrooms and turning them into slush funds of content. You have this intentional dumbing down of America by billionaires and increasing billionaire ownership of what's left of newspapers, including the LA Times, which refused to endorse Kamala because its billionaire owner wants to get a seat on the Trump train should Trump win. So this is a crisis. This is an absolute crisis. It's how Russia has plummeted down a black hole of totalitarianism. They made all of the information out there in the mainstream Fox News, and that's where America's headed. So there's an urgency also to making a podcast. And I've always envisioned, given the remarkable talent of our listeners and the remarkable energy of our community, there's potential here to make local affiliate stations of Gaslit Nation. You don't have to do that, but be open to this idea of being a voice, shining a light on corruption of far-right machinery where you live, because that's sorely lacking today with the decline of local news. And so I'm going to walk you through it. And I'm also going to provide a PDF for you to save as your action guide. And if you have any questions, just send a message through Patreon, send a comment, and I will get to as soon as I can. And if there's enough activity around this topic, I'm happy to do a follow-up workshop answering everyone's questions so you have it all in one spot. Now, first things first, the number one step of launching a podcast is write down your mission statement. I wanted to start a podcast for years. I did not actually listen to podcasts, but I had a yearning to create a podcast to leave behind a historical record. This was growing inside me for some time. Where did this come from? Well, I'm going to read to you an email I sent out to some friends in September 2017, trying to get something like Gaslit Nation off the ground. And remember, Gaslit Nation would not launch until over a year later. But this was me writing to some friends in September 2017, putting out my mission statement for what would ultimately become Gaslit Nation. And I wrote, history books will capture this time, but the feelings of the moment, the abject terror and panic, and pushing through it are so important to capture. Feelings like this are often underexplored, underdocumented in the historical record. The former First Lady of Ukraine told me she wished she had written down what the Orange Revolution of 2004 felt like when she was living through it. I always felt frustrated that the journalists in Stalin's Moscow that I studied for my film didn't record anywhere how it felt making the decisions they made that either helped the Soviet censors cover up the truth or risk their lives to expose it. So there you have it. That's Gaslit Nation in a nutshell. And that is why I have no problem crying on the show. I have no problem losing my mind on the show, showing my emotions, staying human, because I think that's an important part of the historical record. We are ultimately in this fight for our freedom to stay human. Gaslit Nation also launched with the clear intention to build the big blue wave in 2018, which we did. And we've been doing phone banks and all sorts of actions ever since. And as I mentioned, to create a historical record, especially what it feels like. And also, of course, to protect my sister, Alexandra Chalupa, the independent contractor for the DNC, formally, who risked her life and career to ring the alarm that if longtime Kremlin operative from Ukraine, Paul Manafort, was running Trump's campaign, that meant the Kremlin was running Trump's campaign. She was suffering death threats, harassment at the time. And so we wanted to amplify her story to a broader audience because personal security was way too expensive. And so we felt like by making her better known, they would back off. She's in Australia now and she's living her best life. And we're so happy for that. Of course, Gaslit Nation launched to protect Ukraine and America from the Kremlin and share resistance strategies, past and present, and win the war against fascism. So that's quite a detailed mission statement. And that's the show. That's every episode. Every episode captures that spirit. And so, what is your mission statement? Write it down. And I do want to say my mission statement is deeply personal to me. So, your mission statement should be deeply personal to you. And don't try to do another Trump is bad podcast. The world is saturated with those. Give us something specific to you, your background, your ancestors, your zip code, where you live, your family, what you love. You could create a knitting podcast about your passion for knitting. And as you're nerding out over knitting and chatting with your best friend about knitting, you could have hilarious asides about Trump and the times we live in, or your corrupt, slimy local politicians. You can make it a badass knitting podcast. So what I'm saying is unleash your inner beast. That's what the world needs. I'm giving you right now permission to do that because that's what we need. That's where you're going to find your voice. Your mission statement is you overriding the vicious little whiny voice of the ego that tells you you're small, you're nothing, you can't do this, people will laugh at you. I heard that voice when I was launching Gaslit Nation and I just ignored it and kept going. And thank God I did. And so you have that too in you. So your mission statement is giving yourself permission to ignore the stupid, tiny, vicious ego voice, which is really just a speck of dust inside you that you'll blow away as soon as you write down this mission statement.